Good afternoon. My name is Julie Glazer, and I'm the manager of the Equity, Anti-Racism, and Accessibility Program for the Association of Municipal Administrators of Nova Scotia. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn, which has been sponsored by the Accessibility Directorate of Nova Scotia. This has been a series for the last year where we've had conversations with various folks working in the field of accessibility to improve the lives and participation of persons with disabilities throughout Nova Scotia. And we've learned a lot. Today, we're welcoming back Corey Melanson from Sea Change CoLab, who is going to give a presentation on accessibility confident leadership. So welcome, Corey.
Thanks so much, Julie. And as Julie said, my name is Corey Melanson. I am the Learning and Strategy Lead with Sea Change CoLab. And one of the projects we are working on is called ACE, Accessibility Confident Employers. So some of this work comes out of that project. I am a white, queer, neurodivergent settler, and I have shoulder-length brown hair, small earrings, and glasses today, just to give a bit of a visual description, which is a good practice for people who are blind or have low vision to get a sense of kind of who's in the room, whether it's virtual or physical. So I'll share my screen. And so today we're talking about accessibility confident leadership. One of my questions, a reflection question, I guess, before we start is, what does that mean to you? I know AMANS, and through our work at ACE, we talk a lot about accessibility confidence. And what does it mean to be a leader in that space? So that's really the topic that we're going to explore. We have a much longer version of this workshop, so I'll share the full model with you today, and then we'll sort of focus on a few of the elements of the model. And so why? I guess why do we need to talk about this? Well, I think because there are a lot of employees with disabilities who face barriers to meaningful employment and sometimes do not feel safe or included in workplace environments. And this includes all sectors, public sector, impact sector, as well as the private sector. Um, this training is really for managers and leaders in municipalities to build confidence and competence in providing inclusive leadership and support to employees with disabilities. And, some of our research shows that employees feel there's no advantage to self-identifying as a member of a designated group, and that in fact, self-identifying can be used to exclude people from the hiring process and even from promotion and career development. There are perceptions of unfair hiring processes, including a lack of outreach and recruitment to equity-seeking communities, and certainly lack of accommodations in hiring and selection and diversity on hiring panels. So all of these things certainly are concerning and come out of research with employees across Nova Scotia. So some of the workshop objectives. So these are the broader ones for our much longer session, half-day session around accessibility confident leadership. But I did want to give you the full picture and talk about what we're focusing on today. So we start with defining disability rights as human rights to set the framework and really the context around why accessibility confident leadership is so important. We outline an accessibility continuum from proactive to responsive actions to address accessibility barriers. And we have a short section that invites leaders to unpack your own privilege and your positional power or your influence at work. We uncover workplace inequities and barriers around ableism and impacts on persons with disabilities. This says Nova Scotia Public Service, but we do that in general. And we practice creating safer spaces by focusing on those proactive and responsive accommodations, by talking about promising practices for accessible recruitment and hiring, as well as disability disclosure, and then exploring individual, interpersonal, and structural accessibility actions. So maybe you're like, wow, this is just a lunch and learn. How are we going to do all that? We're not. We will we'll outline the accessibility continuum. We will chat briefly about some of those inequities and barriers, but really focus on how to create safer spaces and explore some of the actions. So that's kind of our focus today. We just want to bring this perspective into the workshop, intersectionality. And so that's a term coined in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw and built upon by other Black feminist scholars and others. And it acknowledges the ways in which people's experiences are shaped by their multiple and overlapping identities and social locations. And so beyond acknowledging the identities, it's really about the treatment of those identities and additional barriers that people face as a result of their overlapping identities. So when we do any of this work in accessibility, it's really important to bring an intersectional lens and awareness to accessibility leadership. Another reason why this is so important is, of course, in Nova Scotia, 2 in 5 people have disabilities, 37.9%, the highest rate of disability in the country. And if we assume that 40%, almost 40% of employees have disabilities, how does this change our approach to accessibility? And how does this change our approach to accessibility leadership? So in addition to all of those things we talked about, this is really the model that we have created to share with employers across Nova Scotia. And so you'll see in the middle of that, there's a circle in the middle that says, be aware of your privilege and positional power. This is the center of the framework. It's because it's core to accessibility confidence. It's critical to know what privileges or advantages or influences that you can use to create safer spaces, remove barriers, and make workplaces more equitable as a leader. And this really sets the foundation for everything else we cover kind of in this topic, including viewing accessibility as a continuum, learning about workplace inequities, creating safer spaces, and exploring specific accessibility strategies and actions that you can take. And we'll continue to kind of, look at some of these topics. So the accessibility continuum is certainly one thing we talk about in that model. And it reflects the range of responsive and proactive solutions to accessibility barriers and inequities. The continuum moves from the left to the right. We start on the left with responsive ways to remove or reduce barriers. I think on the left is proactive, and proactive really embeds accessibility considerations from the start. So this is a continuum, and really just trying to share the range of accessibility actions. So creating safer, more inclusive workplaces for everyone, that's on the left. And that is when we have fully, we are as proactive as we can be. When you embed accessibility considerations and disability representation from the start of a policy, of a process, of a project, or a product, all those 4 Ps, that's still very proactive. When you proactively address those barriers, that's somewhere in the middle. Oh, when you say, right, we should have these materials available in alternative formats. Let's just do that. And then when you address barriers as they arise, this is more on the responsive side. And then adjusting environments, services, and products to be able to be used by someone with a disability is actually the definition of an accommodation. And even when we create safer, more inclusive workplaces for everyone over there on the left, we will always have to accommodate individual needs, because there will always be a need to do that, regardless of how proactive we can be. So just some examples of these. I think it's really important to just understand, great, that's the big picture, but when we when we do a little bit of a deeper dive, this is really proactive, is using universal design, psychological safety, and equity and inclusion principles and approaches. Again, on this proactive side, we're creating accessible recruitment and hiring, norms and policies, retention and career development, accessible processes, policies, and products. Again, in that middle, maybe you're proactively addressing barriers through mentorship, through technology, training, physical structures. And that, that's a great approach, still on that proactive side. And when you change policies and practices that create barriers, that's being, again, more responsive. And then accommodations some simple accommodations for individuals might look like flexibility, software, more time, or they may be more complex, like medical or absence management. So as we talk about some of these, and just a little bit of again, going in a little bit deeper into some of these. So some of the accessible practices that we want to highlight are accessible recruitment and hiring, including people with disabilities in decision-making, universal design, flexible work hours and environments, and accommodations. So we'll kind of delve briefly into each one of those. Accessible recruitment and hiring begins before people even enter the workplace, and accessible processes to promote a job. Where are jobs even shared? Have you reached out to organizations that represent or that have people with disabilities? Accessible job postings, are they digitally accessible? Are they in plain language? Can people apply in multiple ways? Have you included a statement around a commitment to accessibility? And certainly for an interview, have you asked about any accommodations needed for the interview? Do you have additional supports? Have you ensured that there's accessible spaces and processes, both for in-person and virtual? So, we know that accessibility begins even before people enter the workplace. And these are really demonstrated by embedding accessibility in recruitment, job postings, and interview processes. And this is a legal requirement. So through the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, it is a legal requirement to accommodate individuals to the point of undue hardship. And we won't go into that definition for this workshop, but you can look at the Human Rights Commission and some of the resources they have around accommodations. Certainly inclusion and representation, really, really key. So making inclusivity and accessibility core values within your team and department, adopting and really embodying the principle of nothing about us without us. This could look like accessibility committees and employee resource groups that represent employees, for example, in this case, with disabilities. They might come together, folks in these groups in ERGs might come together to just debrief, to share, and or to maybe to provide some feedback to the organization or review a policy, for example. And nothing about us without us really recognizes the fundamental importance of including individuals with disabilities in the decision-making processes that directly affect their lives. Really, really key principle of accessibility confident leadership. Universal design, many of us know what this means, but it's really the process of creating products and environments that are usable without changes to meet the needs of everyone. So a single design that can be used by as many people as possible might be a product, a service, or an environment. So for example, this image shows a woman in a wheelchair pulled up at a desk, and the desk height accommodates her wheelchair. Other examples of universal design include ramps, automatic doors, flat panel light switches, closed captioning, web pages that provide alternative text to describe images, smooth ground level entrances without stairs, as well as instruction that presents material both orally and visually, and signs with visual contrast. So that's a big, long list of some universal design examples. Certainly, one of those examples of universal design is to have written material in alternative formats. So, for example, large print, so documents with a font size of at least 18 point, and easy to read sans serif font types, Verdana, Arial. These really accommodate employees who have low vision. Accessible digital documents for screen reader software, and then written materials that include photos will also make it easier for some employees with cognitive challenges or processing delays to understand what is being described. And of course, using alternative text to describe images. Another key thing in terms of physical accessibility is paths of travel. So ensuring that all major pathways to key areas or functions of your workspace are clear of obstacles. And this really makes it easier for all employees to navigate the space. And, we talk about these accommodations on that reactive or responsive side of the continuum. And so some of those might be assistive or adaptive technologies and software, such as speech to text or text to speech, extra time during an interview to complete testing, flexible work arrangements that might be location or hours, adaptive office equipment, such as a keyboard or mouse, noise canceling headphones, or sensory friendly environments. And the diversity of disabilities will require a diversity of accommodations. And these may be very specific to each individual. And so these are just, some examples of the types of accommodations. Flexible hours and work environments are an example of an accommodation that can benefit many people. And this may look different. It may look like flexible hours or work environments, working from home multiple days a week, part-time hours, split shifts, or scheduling work at only one location. And one accommodation myth is that making accommodations for employees with disabilities is complicated and expensive, when in fact, research in Canada notes that between 50 to 80% of suggested accommodations cost the employer less than $500. So the key thing is to really think about what are the benefits? Well, first of all, the legal compliance, and then second, to ensure that workplaces, people with disabilities can really thrive and succeed in workplaces. So we want to shift the focus a little bit right now to how can we create safer spaces? And I use the word safer very intentionally because I'm one person with my own social identities, like I'm neurodivergent, but I'm also, white being a more dominant identity and neurodivergent being more of a marginalized identity. I can't know, even if I'm creating training, for example, I can't know that I can create safety for everyone. So I use the word safer and not safe spaces. So creating safer spaces really, again, it starts with recruitment and hiring. And we want to really think about disability disclosure. And that is the process in which employees reveal their disability to employers. And disclosure of disability can really be daunting for employees and the people they disclose to. Leaders create safer spaces when they proactively address barriers during recruitment and hiring, when they ask questions with curiosity and listen with attention, and practice how to respond to disclosures. So I want to focus again on recruitment and hiring, and then disability disclosures. So for recruitment and hiring, we really kind of want to focus on a couple of things here, different than what we talked about earlier. Accessible job postings and ensuring that those those job postings, again, are in different formats and are accessible for screen readers. Distinguishing between essential and non-essential responsibilities. So when listing qualifications, really listing those essential ones separate from non-essential. Is it essential to own a car? Or is it just essential to be able to travel? Is it essential to lift a certain amount, a certain number of pounds, or is that more non-essential and someone else on the team could do that, for example? In addition, just a willingness and openness to accommodate. So job postings including an employment equity or an accessibility statement, and clearly stating that applicants can request accommodations as well as how to do it. So thinking about the whole process along the journey of recruitment and hiring. Certainly, we talked about interviews and beyond making the spaces accessible, thinking about, can you offer virtual participation? Is there a diverse hiring panel? Has someone requested American Sign Language interpretation? Is the location quiet? Is it scheduled during a time of day when an applicant can be most focused or best able to communicate? Is the location accessible? Have you given advanced copies of interview questions? Is there good lighting, low lighting, or the ability to kind of change the level of lighting? I like to talk about advanced copies of interview questions. So one of the things I ask is, what are you evaluating for in your process around interviewing people? Are you evaluating for extroverts? Are you evaluating for really quick processors? Great, then maybe you can give some questions in advance and then have a few scenarios that you ask in the moment. But if you're not evaluating for those things, I don't think, especially if you're giving questions in advance to everyone, I don't think it really takes away from the interview process. And for many, many people and many, many reasons, it helps to just create, less anxiety, a lot less stress around the whole interview process, and you get to learn more about the person that you're interviewing. So want to talk very specifically about disclosures during interviews. Interviewers cannot request a medical diagnosis. They also cannot ask questions about an applicant's disability unless that question relates to how an applicant would perform certain job tasks. So applicants who disclose their disabilities before or during an interview may offer information about disability and accommodations, but and others might focus on other aspects of their background, such as previous work or educational experiences that they feel are more relevant. And employers who know how to make the hiring process accessible will inevitably have a greater access to a pool of qualified and eager applicants. And they will also be able to hold successful interviews with anyone who chooses not to disclose their disabilities, or those who who ask for accommodations. So let's talk a little bit more about the disclosure dilemma. It is a complex issue, and it revolves around the challenges and the decisions faced by individuals with disabilities when it comes to disclosing their disabilities or other marginalized identities to their employers. Some individuals, of course, do not have a choice in disclosing if their disability is visible. So mostly when we talk about disability disclosure, we're talking about people with invisible disabilities. And this dilemma is really closely intertwined with the right to equal treatment and protection from discrimination that's really enshrined in the Canadian Human Rights Act and, of course, the provincial, the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. And, these mandate, as I said, that employers accommodate the needs of employees with disabilities to ensure equal opportunities. But why is it important for managers or for leaders? Well, as a manager or leader, it's important to understand that the decision to disclose can be fraught with uncertainty as individuals fear potential stigma or bias, even though accommodations are legally required. And disabled employees might worry that disclosing could lead to retaliation, slower progression, and less meaningful roles. And for most, disclosing is a very personal and perhaps difficult decision, even in supportive environments. So some of the tips for responding as a leader is to listen actively, to avoid any intrusive personal questions, certainly to pay attention to the need, and to direct the conversation to how this impacts the employee in the workplace, as well as to provide clear information on supports available if requested. All right, I'm hoping this is going to work. So as part of creating this training around accessibility confident leadership, we did interview people with lived experience. And this video shares, I think from about 4 or 5 people. We asked them, what advice do you have for managers or leaders? And specifically around disability disclosure. So I want to play this video now.
Advice for managers: if somebody discloses to you that they have a disability like ADHD, the what not to do would be to immediately tell them how brave they are for admitting that they have a disability. Because while it does take courage to get to a place where somebody does do that, acknowledging it in that way makes it feel like there's a very good reason why they had to be brave to do that, when I don't believe that there is any reason anybody should feel afraid to talk to a supervisor about having a disability and how it's impacting them at work and the supports that they need to continue working. So a way to create a safe space might be to say, thank you so much for trusting me, rather than, saying how brave that other person is across the table. Because yeah, it took a lot to get there. And I think you should feel honored that somebody trusted you enough to tell you that.
To a disclosure, I think, is as simple as being part of a conversation with a staff person or a colleague. If somebody's trusting you to share a detail of their life, you should be grateful that that person has entered into that sort of relationship, or that that person trusts you. And I think the assumption that you're going to do good with the information they provide you is certainly there. I think as a manager, when somebody confides in you that they have a disability, or that they require a bit of additional support to succeed in their job, I think they're really hopeful that you're going to be receptive to that, that you're listening. I'd recommend documenting details that are provided to you when you receive them, when it relates to a disclosure of a disability. I think it's important to follow the lead of the employee when they do disclose to you. I think kind of anticipating whether they're going to provide you with additional information, or whether you're going to want to be thoughtful about how you probe for additional details, and certainly not demand them or require that they rush off and provide you with documentation from a doctor. It may be just the first step in a conversation toward greater understanding of the needs of this particular employee, and what you can do and what you're obligated to do to ensure that they receive the support that they need to do the job that they've been hired to do.
The manager in a workplace environment is so essential for the happiness, satisfaction, and enjoyment of employees working there. And having a space at work where you feel safe and you feel like you can be yourself, that is really the most important thing for people with disabilities, is to feel that they can be themselves and be their best at work. My biggest piece of advice to managers who are supporting employees with disabilities is to be open, to listen, to treat everybody as whole people, to see the person for who they are and the talents that they bring, and to be curious about the conversations that they're having. One of the best questions I ever had when I was being onboarded by a manager was this: how can I help you be your best at work? It was such a simple question, but it allowed me to feel empowered and to share what I needed from my boss to bring my talents forward at work. I had never been asked that question before. It made a big difference to me. And now, now that I'm managing people, I ask that question now, because it does create that space for a really solid, open conversation to be had that can reveal some really important information for you as a manager to support your staff.
Love that question. How can I help you be your best at work? Again, it's not a question focused specifically on, accommodations or needs or barriers. It's a proactive question that you could use regardless of the person. As a leader, how can I help you be your best? And then listening with curiosity, and following up on what the person shares with you is so key. So I really appreciate hearing those perspectives from people with a range of disabilities, to, for us to get that advice, that really, for leaders to show leadership when it comes to ensuring that their employees can thrive at work. So next, we want to kind of take all of the pieces that we've talked about so far and think about, so how might you enact these? How might you take some action around some of the elements of accessibility confident leadership? And so our framework for the types of accessibility confident actions we can take includes individual, interpersonal, and structural. And we break this up very clearly because these actions are at very different levels. And as leaders, we need to be taking action at all three levels. So individually, these are our actions to educate ourselves, to model inclusive behavior or change our mindset. And remember that at the center of our accessibility confident leadership model is understanding and recognizing your own privilege and power. And that is really these individual actions. Interpersonal, of course, is how our actions support, surface issues, or push for changes through our day-to-day interactions with others. And again, this is about, in that model, it's about understanding the inequities in our workplace. It's about talking to and creating space for employees to share their experiences. Structurally, these are our actions to push for change in norms, policies, and systems. Without these structural actions, change is left up to chance, and chance rarely delivers equity. So I want to just share some examples here. So we'll start with, many workplaces have meetings all the time, whether it's team meetings or external meetings, internal or external. How can we facilitate more inclusive meetings? And what are some of the actions to take at these different levels? So individually, as a leader, you could share your pronouns, can use inclusive language. You can observe group dynamics and challenge your own bias. These are things about noticing, learning, and about making sure that our actions are leading to accessibility and equity. Interpersonally, when you're in a meeting, again, as a leader, you can reduce interruptions, even though you might have the decision-making ability or more power or more influence. Hopefully you're meeting with people to get feedback or to get or brainstorm or get ideas or to understand their experiences. In addition, to give credit where credit is due. So if someone had a great idea or someone did a really good job, we know that, you know, giving credit goes a long way, in particular toward retaining employees and inviting more voices to share. So if there's a meeting and you're only hearing from a few people, maybe taking a pause and saying, can we hear from someone else who hasn't had a chance to share yet, without putting individuals on the spot? Structurally, again, you can distribute speaking time by saying, okay, we're going to go around the circle, whether it's virtual or in person, ensuring meeting environments are accessible, ensuring that you've asked about any accommodation as you've set up the meeting kind of registration or the meeting invite, and ensuring that you're creating systems to distribute the kind of office housework of a meeting. Who's taking the minutes? Who's, you know, who provided, who's taken care of the logistics for the meeting, ensuring that if that's not someone's specific job, it isn't just one person who's doing it all the time. Okay, so now let's look at inclusive hiring and recruitment. So this is, you know, this is a larger process, a little more complex than just facilitating inclusive meetings. Certainly as an individual, there's a need to reflect on how bias shows up in the process. Again, using inclusive language and then seeking out best accessibility practices before thinking about, you know, before going into that process. Ensuring a diverse hiring panel, communicating your values of the organization, your own values in this process, and sharing some of those ideas with your colleagues around seeking out best accessibility practices. Structurally, it's law to ensure that accommodations are available throughout the selection and hiring process. How have you built accessibility statements, accessible job postings, inclusive interviews into the process? And really ensuring that accessible job postings highlight those essential requirements, because sometimes it's easy for people to even take themselves out of the running when they see something is essential, they don't have it, but maybe it's not really an essential part of the job. Okay, our last example is around workplace culture of safety and belonging. So again, this is even broader, more complex, involving everyone within the organization. So as an individual, what are your individual learning journey steps? What have you thought about? What do you need to do to contribute to workplace culture, a workplace culture of safety and belonging? Do you need to do more research and gather a better understanding around accommodations or psychological safety or universal design? Some of those really proactive pieces that we talked about. And really key to disrupt ableist language within your own language. So for example, if you're used to calling something, you know, a handicapped parking space is one example that I hear. Instead, the language is much more inclusive if you use accessible parking space, for example. So we need to be questioning our own language. Interpersonally, it's about building relationships with coworkers with disabilities, again, to further our own learning and understanding, and then being a mentor or an ally to coworkers. Structurally, there is so much here. We only had room to put 4 things on the slide, but there's so much to do to create that workplace culture of safety and belonging. So an accessibility audit really is a way to understand where are we at, what's our baseline in terms of what are we doing around accessibility, but then where are some of the gaps and how can we create a plan to address some of those gaps? Another way is through procurement. So setting diversity, equity, and inclusion requirements for partners, for vendors, or for suppliers. There are lots of programs around diverse supplier diversity, and integrating that into your procurement process is one way to ensure that you're supporting businesses and organizations that represent different marginalized identities. Including equity in your definition of success. So again, when you're planning, strategic planning, and when equity is in that definition of success, it's also really important to then break that down into operational planning, but also performance management. So leaders themselves need to have individual performance plans that include those equity goals. And then, of course, it's all about the money, right? So core budget for accessibility built into strategic operations. If you don't have funding for accommodation, of course, then it probably will be ad hoc instead of, or more responsive instead of more proactive. So building that core budget into financial plans is really key to ensure that not only when there's a need, but again, to be more proactive in our approaches to accessibility workplace culture. So I just want to end here to re-look at the accessibility confident leadership model and really thinking about, what individual, interpersonal, and structural accessibility confident actions you can take. Remember that at the middle of this model is those individual actions, being aware of your privilege and positional power. Some of those interpersonal actions are, identifying barriers and inequities at work. A way to do that is to invite conversations with employees, to ask them a question like, what do you need to be your best in this workplace or at work? Again, your own work is really shifting the mindset of accessibility as a continuum. It's not an either or, it's not, it is a continuum from proactive to responsive. Creating safer spaces. This is an action, again, more at that structural and also interpersonal level. When we talk about recruitment and hiring, when we talk about disability disclosure, retention and advancement, for example, those employees need safer spaces to be the best version of themselves at work. And then really considering accessibility confident actions to take and thinking about the level of actions that are necessary. Are they more individual? Are they more interpersonal? Are they structural, or are they a combination of all three? So I'll stop sharing now and just really want to thank everyone for joining us today, and, back over to you, Julie, to wrap us up.
That was a really wonderful presentation, Corey. Thank you so much. A really good foundation for shifting, I think, some of the mindset and maybe concerns or trepidation that folks have about ensuring that their workplaces are more accessible and they're able to create safer spaces for everyone. You've broken it down really systematically and very, very clearly for everyone to understand the components and the pieces that fit together and the responsibility that we all have to shifting that culture and making sure that our spaces are much more accessible. I just
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
sorry,
No, you
Julie,
go.
and if I could share just kind of one more perspective too, and I know I did talk about when we talk about positional power and leadership, right? You don't have to be a senior leader to have that power. The power and influence is at every level of the organization, and without everyone stepping into accessibility leadership, that's where we will fail to create that accessible and inclusive workplace culture. So just wanted to name that while we're talking leaders and leadership and managers, It really is positional power. So maybe maybe you're not a senior leader, but maybe you're responsible for example, choosing where some of the informal workplace gatherings are
Mm.
and ensuring that those spaces are accessible, for example. Or maybe you are on a review panel, whether it's for an interview or for a promotion.
Mm.
And again, looking around to say, okay, is there representation here? If there isn't, that's something you could advocate for. So I just want to be clear that while we're talking about leadership, everyone has a role to play in being an accessibility confident leader.
100%. Yeah. And that's really how I think about it. And I it's difficult in organizations where there are people who are seen as responsible for equity, diversity, accessibility in an organization because they become the point person. And really, it is really about sharing that responsibility and everybody shifting the culture and being more aware of what the changes are, and what we can all do to contribute to make the workplaces more accessible and safer. One of the things,
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
that, sorry, when you were talking about recruitment and hiring, so we have a position open that we are recruiting for right now, and we're looking at the interview process. So we will be providing the interview questions beforehand, so 24 hours before the interview. And one of the other things that we're interested in as well, we'll be doing this round, is providing people an opportunity to bring in a piece of their work, a portfolio piece to share. There seems to be a trend in HR interview processes right now where prospective candidates are asked to do work beforehand. They're often given an assignment, which is unpaid labor, in my opinion, to an interview. And prospective employees will spend countless hours on their weekend, in their evenings, when they have other things to be doing, to prepare a presentation for an interview. And while, being able to see what an experience, what a prospective employee brings, in their bag of tricks, is a great opportunity for both. Really, I'm interested in what has somebody already done, as opposed to asking them to create something new. So that's one of the things that we'll be doing to make the interview process more equitable and accessible, is asking people to bring an example of their work that relates to the EDIA job description to present to
Yeah,
share.
that's so great. And even I would say, and even if they can't bring it, they could show it if it's digital, for
Yeah.
example. But yeah, what a wonderful way to not only build confidence, because if someone's showing something they're kind of proud of, or like a great way to kind of reduce the anxiety and increase their confidence, but also, as you said, to kind of learn about something that they've really spent time doing. So I think,
Yeah.
and I really like your approach to sending questions in advance, 24 hours in advance. So sometimes people say, yeah, we send questions in advance, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, to me, all that does is actually increase the anxiety.
Mhm.
So that doesn't really reduce it when 30 minutes is like just, someone's driving to an interview or perhaps trying to set up their technology. And that doesn't give them the chance to fully integrate the questions and how they might respond. And as I said, like maybe there is a need sometimes to add a scenario or add a question that's on the spot. But a lot of the interview questions are not like that, right? So really appreciate that you're naming, 24 hours as a best practice
Mm.
in sharing interview questions in advance.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely something that we wanted to shift, and and make more accessible and equitable for folks who we are looking forward to interviewing. So yeah, so I just wanted to share that because it definitely fit into what you were presenting today, among many other things. And I want to thank you again for your time. It's always a pleasure. We learn so much, and look forward to the next sessions with you that will be in person.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much, Julie, and thanks to Amens.
Great, thank you. Bye, Corey.